Good morning.
Good morning.
I so missed your discussion. I was going to say our discussion, but I missed it. So your discussion last week, and I trust and I heard that it was profitable.
It was.
And it was that time of discussing faith. And it was week 2 of our lessons. And it hopefully helped you to see the development of the concept of faith throughout the entire book. Hopefully you got just this real broad picture of what he was trying to get. So this morning, as we turn to chapter 12, we're going to continue to watch as the author develops his theme and purpose while keeping in mind the historical context of the book. So to do that accurately, we need refreshing, don't we?
Imagine that.
Let's review. Okay, what book are we studying?
Hebrews.
Yay, everybody got it. Okay, and tell me about the author. I'm going to do something a little bit different in that while you do the review, while you're talking to me, I'm going to put this on the board.
Sure.
And then we're going to use it throughout the discussion.
Sure.
So, the book is
Hebrews.
I'll just go there. Hebrews. The author,
We don't know.
unknown.
Some commentaries do say Paul.
Some commentaries do say Paul. What would we say based on our study?
Well,
Do we think it's
second
Paul?
generation.
Second generation hearer of the gospel, does that match his
No.
testimony?
No.
Oh.
Yeah, so that's kind of why, and I don't,
I didn't go through the whole thing.
No,
but I'm
no,
backtracking, trying to catch up.
yeah, and I appreciate that because I know that you didn't get through the whole thing, and so it's funny because there are a lot of people who think it's a very Pauline epistle, and there are things that look very Pauline, right? He's very methodical in the way that he lays out this case for Jesus, right? So it can look very much like it's very just awesome.
And
epistle,
technically,
right?
he could be considered a second generation because he wasn't with Jesus as Jesus walked on the earth until
Right.
his encounter, which you could technically say wasn't really a face-to-face encounter.
Personally, I think it was Silas. He
Okay.
had a great deal of
But I can see how that was.
contact with Paul, so he would have absorbed a lot.
Yes,
of
yes,
the
of the
Pauline.
Pauline situation.
But
Yes, but I would
That's
say
just my
that
conjecture.
he is very specific about that testimony. It's not just that he's a second generation hearer, but he says, we heard from those who saw
saw
him,
him.
right?
Yeah.
And so again, that doesn't match like perfectly the testimony of Paul. Now, it's totally fine. If we get to, we've talked
Yeah.
about this before too. If we get to heaven and find out and Paul goes, I did it,
Yeah.
I wrote the book of Hebrews, okay, great. I don't mind being wrong,
Yeah.
but hopefully the people who write that it's Paul don't mind being wrong too, because it
Yeah,
could
it could
be.
be something.
One of the things we joked about too in previous sessions was that it might be a woman. It could be anybody, because we really don't know. They don't, and one of the things about Paul is he's pretty clear in most of his writings that
Yes,
this is me
he
writing
is,
it.
yes.
In fact, and sometimes he is,
Right.
see, I write this with
Yes.
my own hand,
When
so
he
that they
does
can
the reading at
recognize
the end.
his,
Yeah.
so they can recognize his handwriting.
Right.
And so it would be out of character
Yeah.
for this to be one of his writings
Now,
that he doesn't
my
identify.
Amplified Bible said the same thing what you're saying.
Okay, good.
Exactly.
Good, okay, great. So, well then, I'm right.
we always knew that.
No, but I mean, what is so wonderful about the way that we do our inductive study
Yeah.
is that we can discover it for ourselves. We
Yeah.
can come to conclusions based on our study of the Word
Right.
and not based on, some
What a
guy said it was
commentary
Paul, so
says.
it must
Yeah.
be Paul,
Right.
right? So we can respectfully disagree based on the Word, right?
Right.
Okay, so what do we know about him? Second generation hearer, right?
Yes.
Second-
Contemporary of Timothy.
Okay.
Jewish. Most likely.
He's a Jewish guy, right? Because he just,
He understands the Jewish law and practices and all the rest.
Right.
And
It just
says
flows
my
out of it.
fellow,
Yeah, yeah.
yes, he's very, very much a Jewish
Yes.
writer. Okay, so tell me about the recipients.
they're Jewish too.
Primarily, not necessarily all.
Well,
Okay,
that's
right.
true.
Yeah, right.
Primarily, because there could be some Gentiles in there, right?
That's true.
Probably believers.
Primarily Jewish, sorry. I'm trying to catch up with you, you've been ahead of me. And they are believers.
Yes,
And
they
that
are.
is another thing that some commentators would say they're not believers, right? In fact, one of my very favorite resources is Wiest, and Wiest and I just disagree on this point. And I came across it again this week because he has that ingrained in him, that he thinks that this is a letter that is written for the purpose of proselytizing those who maybe have been on the fringes, maybe have heard the gospel, but this is, let's go ahead and make this faith real. I would disagree with that, and we would disagree with that, and why would we disagree with that based on the book of Hebrews? What are your reasons for saying that they are believers? Can you remember any of the
Well,
things that
they
he
have
says?
been showing love to their brethren, and they are sharing in their, they have suffered
being persecuted.
persecution.
Yeah, they're in the
And they
midst of
are-
persecution, and they have changed lives in the midst of persecution, right?
Yes.
They are sharing in the sufferings,
And financially, they
Right.
were helping out.
right? They're suffering as a result of a changed life that he sees in them. What are some of the names that he uses? He just calls them good names. What are the good names that he calls them?
Beloved.
Beloved.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So he loves
brethren.
them.
Well, it encourages them not to shrink back or fall
Right.
away, so
Yeah.
they've got to have gotten
They
some
gotta get
message
their
go
reasons.
backwards.
Yeah, there has to be some belief there. for
Right,
them.
and he includes himself in it, right? He
Yes.
says our and let us
Right,
and we. Remember, it's that coming alongside. It shows that relationship that is not just, hey, I like you people and I'd really like for you to join my team. It's, we're all on the same team.
We're in this together.
Yeah, we're in this together. So that's the recipients. Now, tell me about the historical context.
We're starting under persecution.
Okay, so these recipients are facing persecution,
Some are drifting away.
and they're facing drift, right?
Persecution from without and the possibility of drifting from within.
So that's what it is.
Right, so they're under pressure, right? Life is hard. It's not easy for these people. The persecution that they're facing, the seizure of property, imprisonment, those kinds of things, even if they're not experiencing them personally, they're watching their friends experience these things, right? And so they're sharing in that suffering with them. So, and it's a very real possibility that there could be more persecution coming, right? Now, the within, the pressure from within is the danger of drifting, of falling back, of shrinking back, right? And so that's something that he is very vigilant to warn them against, right?
Well, and that's another thing that tells us that they're primarily Jewish, because the temptation is to drift back to the law.
Yes, back into the law. So
Yeah.
that's where they would go. It's eyes on Jesus, but there's this, that's easier. I know that. Let's
Yeah.
go back to, I got
Safe.
that. Yeah, that's safe. That's what I know, that's what I grew up with. So I'm trying to make this a little bit more clear that this is the four corners of our book. Okay, what goes in this one?
Purpose.
Purpose. And what is the author's purpose?
Exhortation.
Exhortation,
And encouragement.
which is a part of that exhortation.
Yes.
Okay, and we find that he actually states this purpose in chapter 16, which or excuse me, 13. And so we'll be looking at chapter 13 pretty quick here, so we'll have to just keep our eyes open. But did you catch the word exhortation in chapter 12? It was in there. Okay, so I just thought. So that's his purpose. It's a brief word of exhortation, and we see lots of exhortations throughout. A couple weeks ago when I was with you, we walked through, by way of review, the exhortations of the book. Now, what goes here in the middle? Theme. What is the theme of the book of Hebrews? Based on all of this, what does everything drive at?
Consider Christ.
Our faithful high priest.
Consider Jesus.
Christ or Jesus. Christ Jesus. Let's do Christ Jesus.
There you go.
Consider Jesus.
Got it covered.
And this is a book about Jesus, right? But we always throw in that consider so that we always remember that there's an exhortation here. So that just helps us to remember that the whole purpose of it is not just here's a book about Jesus, but we need to live a certain way in light of who he is and in light of what we learn about him. So good. Yeah, we did that good review. Now, as we turn this morning to chapter 12 and our homework, we're going to kind of sort of look at it backward. So, backwards of the way that we worked on it this week. In case you didn't make it to day 5, you can be forgiven because day 4, are you kidding me? It took me 3 sessions of study to do day 4. And I was like, I don't know why this wasn't 2 weeks, but okay. So they asked us on day 5, after we did all of the observation worksheets, after we did the word studies of day 4, they asked us to write out how chapter 12 fits into the author's purpose, right? And how it fits into the structure of this epistle. So let's look at that first, and then we'll start to pick up the homework along the way. So I think it'll flow, the discussion hopefully will flow naturally, but we're going to go all the way to the end and then work our way back to the beginning and then back through, okay? So, what is his stated purpose again?
Exhortation.
The exhortation. And where do you see exhortation in chapter 12? Did you mark them so that they jump off the page, those exhortations?
I mean, like the considers, I circled all the imperative verbs.
Oh,
Right.
okay, good. Yes,
Yeah. And he
yes.
tells them to, pursue peace and help the weak hands and feeble knees.
Let's just start at the beginning because there's quite
Okay.
a few,
Yeah, there were quite a
okay?
few, yeah.
So the very first exhortation, where did you find that?
Verse
3.
1.
Verse
Let
1.
us.
Yes.
Oh.
There's a let us, and remember
There's
that's
2
part of
let
his
uses.
pattern. So that would have been something that we might have been able to say, oh, this had some more let us's, right? This had some more exhortation. So there's 2 let us's. What is the first one?
Lay aside every encumbrance and the sin which so easily entangles us.
And then the second let us.
Run with endurance.
Run with endurance, the race that's set before us.
Okay, so now this is where we're going to go back and pick up, okay? So did you do your word study of the words encumbrance and sin?
Yeah.
Those are E and,
No, B and C.
Oh, yeah.
B and C, sorry.
Oh, yeah,
God,
I did.
it's
Yeah.
like, there's just too much writing on this page. Okay, so encumbrance is, tell me about that. This is used one and only time in the New Testament, and it's right here. So tell me, what does it mean?
A mass.
A hindrance or impediment, a burden of some sort.
Right,
A bulky weight.
a bulky weight.
Zodi, I loved his, a tumor.
I know.
Yeah, I saw
Mass,
that, too.
magnitude, weight, burden, impediment.
Yeah, Yeah, and also he says that it's a burdensome weight in reference to its pressure, burden, or load, right? And so does that remind you a little bit of what's going on here, what they're facing, right? So maybe that could be part of what he's referring to. Those are encumbrances. I really liked Weist's. He says, a swelling of superfluous flesh.
Yes, yes.
Oh,
I mean, if you love words, you have
Yeah.
got to love that one. That's just
Well, he
amazing.
also says an athlete must shed the extra weight to run the race and receive the prize.
Right. So it's that it refers to that kind of when you train, losing those extra pounds that slow you down. And then what about sin? Okay, wait. I'm sorry. Let me back up.
Yeah. That's,
Sorry. What I wanted to say was that when we do word studies, we do all that research, right? But we need to then, at the end of it, figure out, okay, well, what does it mean, right?
Right.
So we need to synthesize it. So what, if you were to put it in your own words, would you say is the definition of encumbrance here?
Something that holds us down that we need to get rid of.
That's perfect.
all that
That's
does
perfect.
not help hinders.
Yes. Yes.
So the extra weight may not be sin, but it's anything that gets in the way of our life of faith must be laid aside.
Yeah, and I do love, and I know what you're referring to, part of what you're referring to there is what, I think it's in Weist, he refers to expositors, it's a quote from expositors, and he quotes a lot from other people, other sources, so that we don't have to go to them, because I've never been able to find who he's talking about, but he says, the Christian runner, this is the quote, the Christian runner must rid himself even of innocent things which might retard him, and all that does not help hinders. And this is the best part of that quote. It is by running that he learns what these things are.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, you pick up and you go, and along the way you realize, hey, I don't need that.
This would be a lot
Bye.
easier if I didn't have that.
Isn't that such an interesting picture of that? So it really did help to kind of solidify this understanding of what these encumbrances are. Again, they could be good things, but if you're working toward the best, right, and you get better and better and better along the way, you realize that's not for my best. So I'll just lay that aside, right?
Well, and this is one long run-on sentence. So we're not stopping with just laying aside and running the race.
Right.
There is a goal in which we're running toward.
Yes, yes. Okay, so the next thing that we are to lay aside is sin, right? The sin which so easily entangles us. So we did a word study of sin, and we've all studied sin a bunch of times. What does it mean here?
Missing of the mark.
Missing the mark.
Unbelief.
Right.
Here
And-
it's unbelief.
Yeah,
I believe in this context it's the sin of unbelief.
yeah.
Okay, okay.
Any act contrary to the will and law of God. An offense in relation to God with emphasis on guilt.
Yeah, that's that emphasis on guilt, and I really liked bringing that out.
That's from Zodiades.
Right, and I thought this was interesting. It is a governing principle and power. That's how it's referred to in Vines. He refers to it as a missing of the mark. It is the most comprehensive term for moral obliquity, again, a wonderful word, used of sin as A, an inward element producing acts, B, a governing principle or power, so that's very interesting, and C, a generic term, so just a very generic term for sin, or D, a sinful deed or an act of sin. Right, so that's how it's used throughout Scripture. But I really liked that a governing principle or power, which definitely speaks to what we're talking about. And
Right,
then,
and I think synthesizing that, it
Yes.
is whatever the sin is, it has more power over you than running the race. So I think that's why it's so often hard for us to recognize what that sin may be until we start on the journey, and then we start seeing what we continually trip over.
Yeah, the thing that,
Because
So
that's the
basically-
thing that has the most power over us. And it's so easy to see this, I believe, in 1 week's time. What keeps getting in the way of me
Yes.
opening the Word and getting my homework done?
Yeah.
You know, it's just whatever that is. And again, obviously, it's not always a sin
Right.
in the sin, but it is a sin of unbelief. Because if I am not believing that God has called me to study His Word, then that's my issue, not whatever it might be. And I can think of 1,000 things that get in the way, but it's not my place to judge. But you know, it's if we're not doing what God tells us to do in His Word, then we're not believing His Word.
definitely. Now, an interesting thing, if you want to go back through Hebrews and track the use of this word, it's used a lot. But it is very interesting, and that's why I wanted to bring out what Zodiitis said about the emphasis upon guilt as far as sin, is that it's the reason we need a sacrifice. And it is what Jesus' sacrifice covered. And if you walk through Hebrews and look for the use of this word, and there's a way that you can do that real simply, and I'll explain that at another time as far as how to find it, how many times a specific word's used in a book, but
Blue
it's
Letter
used.
Bible will do that very
Oh,
simply.
okay.
Yeah,
Well,
very simply.
Yes, and then there's a really long way to do it, and that's the way we do it. So, but I mean, it's in chapter 1, it's in chapter 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 9, 10, a ton in 10, chapter 11, and in chapter 13. And almost to a time, it is in relation to or right next to Jesus' sacrifice for that sin. And so that, I thought that was a really interesting way that he's continuing to develop this. If Jesus has paid for our sin, if his blood has covered our sin, then it is all the more reason for us to lay it aside, right? It's covered, it's taken care of. I no longer need to have that as a governing principle or power in my life, right? So let's real quickly look at what we got for easily entangles. This is one and only time in the whole New Testament too, right here.
Anything constricting or obstructing
Okay,
the sin so full of, this is Zodiates.
okay.
The sin so full of peril, which so easily subjects one to calamity.
Yeah, there's some good stuff in that.
I have the old fashioned, whatever I have, and the word was beset.
Yeah.
Yes,
And
yes.
it said, something standing around, a competitor thwarting a racer in every direction. And that, I like that because it made a picture in my
That
mind.
does make a picture.
Yeah.
It's almost like you're
there's
running
somebody
in a
just
circle with
standing there,
people.
you know, getting in your way to keep you from running the race, which I liked. And
Give you
then,
an elbow as you go around a turn.
yeah.
That's funny that you'd say elbow, because I read where it's actually the inside crook of your arm. So when you bend that, you surround what is there.
Where did you get
You know what? I didn't write it down, but
Funny.
because there was a ton of stuff.
Yeah,
But
there was a ton of
it
stuff.
talked about
That's
it
interesting.
talked about the inside crook of the elbow that it surrounds.
Okay.
But when you break the word apart,
Yes.
Go ahead. You can do that.
When you break the word apart, which this one was one of the longer ones to break all the way apart. The EU is from, the peristeme is from peri, which is about or around, and histeme, which is to make to stand. And then the euperistatos, which is the word that we're looking at, is to stand around, to turn around, and easily encircling. So it has that picture of something that is in your whole 360, right? So it's all the way around you. It's the sin that so easily entangles you, encircles you. And the picture that was mentioned a couple of different places is a picture of a long, heavy robe that would impede one from running. So it's just the same thing. If you were wearing a long robe, then back in the day, I feel like Kay when I do they hitch it up, because that's how she would do it. So they'd hitch it up and they'd tie it up in their belt so that they would have their legs free to run without that robe around them, without that
with that bulky
being
encumbrance.
easily entangled. And you can just imagine, it'd be like a cartoon almost, that you take off running and you start tripping over your own garment. And so you're just falling, right?
Well, you could be easily entangled because some sins may not seem uncomfortable. So you have a decision to make about even certain things. I mean,
Yes.
it happened last night watching the. I didn't want to watch them by myself, and I didn't.
You didn't. There were 100 million people watching.
But and there were certain people I didn't want to watch them with. I did too, because I knew what they were thinking. And the phone rang, and I was debating then I was not going to watch them at all until the next day and see what happened. But the phone rang about 3 o'clock, and it was Annie Hall from our prayer group, and Sheila, her dog, Buddy wants you to come up and watch.
Oh,
So there we go. But I could have, in the meantime, made the decision just because I wanted company or I wanted to be with somebody to watch it with somebody that was very biased and off and uncomfortable.
And uncomfortable.
Right.
Yeah, there's the comfort and then there's the uncomfort.
See how he works in those little things.
There's a new word study that I'm still working my way, a new word study tool that I'm still working my way through. It's, I don't even remember what it's called, linguistic something, expositors something.
Oh, that sounds fun.
Yeah. I call it the leg in my, so it's my leg.
Okay.
So my new leg says, literally, this is for that easily entangles, literally having easy distress. So it's not hard for this to trip us up, right? This is not a difficult thing. And so with all that said, by the way, Weiss does refer to it likely as the sin of unbelief.
because it's not the sins, it's the sin.
Yes.
Yeah.
I've written that
But
too.
I would caution you on going along with him for that specific reason, because he says it's because he knows that these recipients aren't believers and that
But Zodiitis said the same thing. I wrote it down
Yeah,
for
MacArthur
Zodiitis.
says the
Right.
same
Yeah.
thing.
Right, but did you use somebody else? Just don't use Weiss on that one.
Well, MacArthur used
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm just saying, for the justification is a little
But
off,
really, when
yeah.
we stop and think about it, what is going to be the thing that trips us up every time?
Right, and see, that's for me where the synthesis started happening of, okay, what are we talking about here? There are certain sins that do not appeal to me no matter what. There's nothing that you can do to make them enticing to me. But there are some sins that are easy. Right, and so these are the ones that they're that I think he's referring to. These are the sin, and so my synthesis of it, and yours doesn't have to agree with it. It's the gotcha sin, the one that we knew and loved, right? The one that is just so easy to get back into the habit of doing, and whether that is unbelief or whether that is something else, because again, this is that thing that relates back to what the danger is. They have that danger of drifting in sin, the sin that easily entangles them back into some old ways and some
What
old
about
patterns, right?
persecution though that's being presented? I mean, you can run a good race and persecution come and not
Yes.
handle that very well.
Right, and I think the persecution would almost fall under the encumbrances category. So I think we're talking about like two different things that he's saying, lay aside both of them. And they're almost like two categories of things. And he's, again, addressing the things that they're coming up against, which is those persecutions from without. So those would be the things that lay on you and weigh you down and burden you, that you just
But I think
I've
with
been on
those,
a journey though, I can say you can fall into not responding well. You can
Yes.
actually hate them. You can
Yes.
not forgive them. These are all sins.
so
Yeah, and then it's
all
your
of that
response.
is true, and I believe it is, that when you get back to the core of what that is.
Yeah.
What is the core of the sin? Not the things we do.
No.
And I think too, with some of this persecution, we're going to get to that with the discipline of the Lord and what the purpose in all of that is. But looking at this first section here, verses 1 and 2, we've got to start with that therefore. He's going right back just to chapter 11 and talking about those heroes of chapter 11.
Yeah.
What was the encumbrance that got in their way? You know, we said last week how reassuring it was to you, Jane, that even though they did all these things, but I remember when Moses did this, and David did this, and Samson did this, and da 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 da. So they all had their areas of unbelief because it wasn't trusting in God. So instead of jumping too far back, let's just go right back,
Right.
you know, staying in the context of what
Right,
this
yeah.
is.
Yeah, but I think
So
that,
then can I put that with what I just said? If I'm running the race, I'm persecuted, it can even rise up within the church against what you're doing.
Yes, sure.
Okay, so you begin to get resentful, you begin to hold it against them. What it's really saying, I'm going to throw that aside, I'm going to get rid of that because I'm
Not
by
trusting
faith,
God.
Right,
Yeah.
by faith, I'm going to go past
Right,
that.
Yeah.
because when I feel those ways and
Yeah.
react those ways, those are 1,000 sins that happen in a nanosecond in my
Yeah.
thought life.
Yeah.
But when I
Right.
get back to the core, it is, I don't believe God, I don't believe you, God, that you are allowing this in my life to refine me, to sanctify me. You have promised this in your word, but I don't really believe your word.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm
Yeah.
going to react in the flesh.
And I think it's really important to say at that point, is that that's just, we've all been there, that, and we were just talking about this, I was just talking about this with someone, that you can't help your immediate reaction and emotion to something that's happened that's not right, but to you or whatever, and you know, so we'll get angry or we'll get defensive or we'll just hate them for that moment. And then I take all of those things, and I'm a journaler, and so I write them. But you can do it in a way. I take those babies. Lord, I'm feeling, I hate them, and that was wrong, and they shouldn't have done it, and I, here. And we can't beat ourselves up for how we feel, because feelings aren't right or wrong. Feelings are just what happens and how we respond to them. But the very next step is our choice. Do we keep them? Do we, he deserves to be, or do we go, oh, but God, here, take that, because I don't want to be that way, you know? And so the handing him the emotion itself wasn't sin, it was just reaction. But what do we do with it? If we put it in the basket, and I always picture this basket, and hand it to Jesus, and it's like, okay, you know, and that's
the weight is off of you. I think that's the whole idea of that, all of that. The encumbrances, the things that are without, the sins, the things that are within, how we respond to the encumbrances, how they all relate life, right?
Yeah.
This life that is difficult, we say, I'm just going to put that, all the negative things, right? I'm going to lay those aside and I'm going to press on to Jesus, right? That's the whole idea, is putting it aside, because those are the things that are going to trip you up. Those are the things that are going to weigh you down on this
And I think
race
it's
that
real
you're-
important, I have to say this too, it's really important, it's taken my lifetime to learn this, not to beat ourselves up for our original reaction. That's just normal. And if I've given it to Jesus, then I don't have to beat myself
It
up.
actually is a very good thing because it
Yes.
reminds you
Yes.
how short you are.
Yes.
When my first reaction is retaliation, or the first thought that comes to my mind should be, thank you, Lord, you're showing me that I am not dead to self.
Yep.
And it can go no further than
Than
that.
that,
Now,
yeah.
I know you are a journaler, and I am not nearly as much as you are, but I have changed over the last 10 years or so. I don't write down anything negative like that.
Oh.
I don't. It's reinforcing it in my brain. It's solidifying it every time I redo it.
It's getting it out. for
And
me.
that's fine.
It's
And
getting
that's
it out
fine.
for me. And I never do. I hate him. It's like, Lord, I feel la 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 la. I was so hurt when he la 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 la. You know, so it was just my
But
reactions.
there's-
But it's getting it out. It's like vomiting. Excuse me. But
No, I
that's the
think
way I
it-
get
and
it
that's
out.
okay.
I think it's a very David thing.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because David does that in
Yeah.
the Psalms.
Yeah.
I mean, he's got these enemies and he's going, what? This guy did this thing to me and you know, and then by the end, see,
Right.
that's what's awesome.
I work it
Is
through.
either way,
Yeah,
right? If you're
yeah,
doing it by
yeah.
writing it down, if you're doing it by crying out to the
Right,
Lord, both
right.
of them are crying out to the Lord,
Absolutely.
right? And so either way that is happening,
However it
the
works for
end
you.
result should be just as the author of Hebrews is wanting you back, focus back where
Yes.
it needs to
Yeah.
be. And that's what the Psalms are so precious
Yes.
for.
Yes.
Because we know by the end of every
Yeah.
single one
Right.
of them, the focus is back where it needs to
Which
be,
is,
right?
just to finish
yeah.
it, you know this about me,
I
that
do.
by the time
I
I'm
do.
done,
Oh, it's just,
It-
oh Lord,
God
you're just
has
so
a yes.
wonderful. And
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
I
yeah.
think we all want to be like Stephen, you know. and-
Yeah.
yeah,
I think
yeah.
Sometimes we're like sons of thunder, you know,
Yeah,
like
yeah,
Lord,
yeah.
get them.
What did David say? Psalm 139, search me, O
yes.
God, and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts, and see if there is any wicked way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. So as soon as that happens, this is the
Right.
search your heart, search your own heart,
Yeah.
you know. Maybe you did say something that you didn't mean, or they took it the wrong way, or whatever.
Right.
But,
Right, and he says-
But God knows.
Okay, we have not even made it past verse 1. So I'm just going to pull us back.
Well, I don't know whose fault that is.
I don't know if you remember, but we were talking about the exhortations in chapter 12. And the first ones were let us lay aside and let us run, right? And so there's the reference to running a race and that sort of thing. The next one is verse 3. Consider him. Does that fit in with the theme of the book?
Yes.
That's the theme of the book. Okay, what about verse 5, the next exhortation? It could be argued as an exhortation. If you didn't mark it as an exhortation,
Oh, I did.
but
Yeah.
yeah, it could be. What does it say there? What is the exhortation there?
Do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, and don't faint when reproved.
Right, so there's another kind of twofold exhortation there.
Sorry.
That's okay.
I'm so sorry.
We just needed a little sting in the middle of our Bible study. Okay, my son, do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, nor faint when you are reproved by him. And did you see that this kind of could, as we developed it and as we looked at it, it kind of fits into some of this thing too. Did you ever see or remember in the book of Hebrews where the author referred to us as sons of God before? Did that ring any bells for you? Because that's basically what he's saying, right? This exhortation has also with it that encouragement or that salve that he offers. Remember, there's warnings, and there's the exhortation, there's the warning, then there's the salve that he sometimes offers. And the salve is that it proves that you are his
Right.
if he is indeed disciplining you, right? And so the exhortation is do not regard it lightly and don't faint. Now, he referred back to and I wrote this down for the reason that it fits into the context of Hebrews. In chapter 2, verses 10 through 18. And again, this is referring to Jesus, but it is Jesus' ministry to us as sons. And so at the beginning it says, "For it was fitting for him, for whom are all things, and through whom are all things, in bringing many sons to glory, to perfect the author of their salvation through sufferings." And then he says, "For both he who sanctifies and those who are sanctified, the sons who are sanctified, are all from one Father. For which reason he is not ashamed to call them brethren, saying, I will proclaim your name to my brethren." And he goes on, and then he says in verse 14, "Therefore, since the children share in flesh and blood, he himself likewise also partook of the same, that through death he might render powerless him who had the power of death, and might free those, the children, who through fear of death were subject to slavery all their lives." So do you see that? Then he concludes that idea by referring to him giving us help, the descendants of Abraham. And so it says, "Therefore he had to be made like his brethren in all things, that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in all things pertaining to God, to make propitiation for the sins of the people." That's another one of the times where that hamartia is there. And so it's just so beautiful that this is not the first time he's mentioning that you are a son of God. You are a partaker with Jesus. He came and he partook of your flesh. And so I just really like that. Now, verse 12 is our next exhortation in Hebrews 12. And what does it say? What does he tell us to do there?
Strengthen the hands that are weak and the knees that are feeble.
And then it's followed quickly by another exhortation.
Make straight.
Make straight paths for your feet, so that the limb which is lame may not be put out of joint, but rather be healed.
Okay, and then there's one last "let us" in the chapter, and it is in verse 28.
Well, don't forget the pursue peace with all
Right,
men.
and the grace.
And,
15.
see to it
Sorry.
that no one comes short of
I'm
the
getting
grace
ahead
of
of
God.
myself. Excuse me.
Oh, we won't let you.
No, I really did. I got like way ahead of myself, I guess. Okay, so
Where are we
pursue.
now?
I'm sorry, verse
14 and
14.
15.
Pursue peace. Thank you for reminding me and going, hey, where are you going? Pursue peace with all men and what?
Sanctification.
Now, do you see him getting the exhortation ball rolling? He's had 12, 13, 14. He's starting to just, hey, I like this exhortation thing. We're going to see even more in the next chapter and as we go forward. So verse 15, what does he say?
See to it that no one comes short of the grace of God, that no root of bitterness springing up causes trouble.
Right. And then the next one is, and I love that, did you mark that see to it that? That was I didn't see that until this morning when I was reading through it one more time. And I mean, I've read this, I don't know how many times, and it's like, oh, look, it's repeated. Okay, let me mark it. So see to it that, in verse 25, what's the next see to it that?
Do not refuse Jesus who is speaking, is what I wrote down.
Yeah, see to it that you do not refuse him who is speaking.
Yeah.
And then there's that warning, right? And then finally, there's one more let us in the chapter, in verse 28.
Oh, yeah.
Let us
So
show
gratitude.
55.
No, put on here.
Page 121
Yes.
on the,
Yeah.
or, I've got my old observation worksheets.
Oh, okay.
So-
No, it is 121.
Well, you have your
You
old
have
too.
your old ones.
Oh,
Some
yeah.
people may not have them.
Oh.
55 is the
okay.
new one.
Oh, okay.
But we're just walking through the scripture. We're just walking through
yeah,
the
we're not
observation
switching.
worksheet.
I got
Yeah.
lost, I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. I got lost too. So we found ourselves again. Okay, so do you remember that the author had the pattern of exhortation followed by warning? Remember that? And there's a variation on that pattern here in chapter 12, because the warning takes on a more explanatory tone there when we get to the one that's in verse 5. And my son, do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, nor faint when you are reproved by him. And then he goes and then he just does some explanation. So it's more an explanation than it is more information is given regarding discipline, which everyone must face. So it's kind of interesting because it's sort of a warning with the relief built in, right? Like I said, so it's, you're all going to face it. We're all going to face it because guess what? We're His.
Yeah.
And He loves us, right? And He's taking care of us as a father takes care of us. So that has that salve. And so the discipline, what does the discipline prove?
That God loves us.
That He loves us, but also that we are what?
His.
That we are His sons. So it proves sonship. But then later the warning is clear. So another pattern that we haven't gotten to give a full review yet, and we'll probably do it next week because, I love to do a good review, is the author's pattern of using comparisons and contrasts.
I love that.
And he develops it in almost every chapter. There's some sort of comparison. There's some sort of contrast that he's working through. And he uses them quite often. And so I think next week we might be able to have time to look at them a little bit closer. But let's just try to remember that he often uses comparisons and examples often, and the comparisons are sometimes good and sometimes bad, right? Sometimes it's be like this, and sometimes it's don't be like this, right? And so can you think of whom he uses here in chapter 12? Esau, right? Now, is he a good comparison or a bad comparison? He's a don't do that, right? He's a no, this is not the guy you want to be. And so
Well, I think he does that again early on in Jesus.
yes, so we have the good comparison, right? We keep our eyes on him, right? And we're going to get to that. So that's why I'm kind of, so we've got a bad comparison. Now, he also compares two things quite often. He compares the old and the new covenants, right? Do you remember that we worked through those? Do you see a comparison or a contrast closely related to these covenants here in chapter 12? The old system versus the new system, the old versus the new in whatever way. Did you notice that?
Well, it talks about in verse 24, Jesus the mediator of a new covenant.
Right.
And he compares the sprinkled blood, which speaks better than the blood of Abel.
Right.
So that part is.
Yes.
Well, but
And that
he's talking
whole
about the
thing.
old.
Yeah, that whole section, starting in verse 18, you found it,
Yeah,
and ending
yeah.
in verse 24,
Yeah.
is a big, long comparison, right?
Yeah, of when
He's
the
saying,
law came.
yes,
and when Jesus-
right. You are not coming to this,
Yeah.
but you are
Yeah.
coming to this. So it's
Yeah.
it's in relation to that old, because if you didn't notice, the what he's talking about, you have not come to, is a very Old Testament view of, these are things that happened in that wilderness wanderings, and then the new is what we have now, right? And so it's that old covenant versus new covenant. So again, there's comparisons being made that help us to see how it fits into the entire book. Now, I'm hoping that we will have time next week, because she did say at the end of the homework that we're not done with chapter 12. So
Yeah.
I'm hoping that we'll really have time to dig into, because I've made a list. You know me, I made a list. This is my little comparison. So I wrote down all the little details of what it is, and I even numbered them. That's another good thing with lists on your observation worksheet. I numbered them along. And it was wherever it said "and to," I put a new number. So one, and I got up to, for the old, I got up to 4, but for the new, I got up to 8. So It's better, right? Okay, now, what about how the author continues to develop the theme of the entire book in chapter 12? How did chapter 12 develop the theme, consider Jesus our great high priest? Did it say that somewhere in the chapter? Did it say, consider Jesus?
Consider him who
Yeah.
endured.
Yeah.
Verse 3.
Yeah, and so that helps to develop the theme, right? We've got a good, clear picture. And then what he does is he tells us more about this Jesus. And that's what he's been doing this whole time. This whole book has been about Jesus. Remember, there's the elementary things that were at the beginning that were just too easy. We need to move on because we've got even bigger things, because they were actually really hard things. But then he moved on to some really deep things, that he is a high priest according to the order of Melchizedek, right? And so he's developing their understanding of Jesus. He's creating a bigger picture of who Jesus is than they had previously known. So here we come to chapter 12, and we see that he says, for consider him, and then he starts talking about this Jesus, right? And so in verse 2, it says, fixing our eyes, it's the same idea, fixing our eyes, considering him on Jesus, the author and perfecter of faith. And so we did some word studies, and that's, I'm trying to go back and cover everything. Okay, did you do your word studies on author? Mm-hmm. That's F on page, I can't even find the page number. I don't want to write it. 8. F. Okay, what did we learn about the Greek word for author?
It means originator, founder, leader, ruler, prince, captain. But Zodiades pointed out it's distinguished from being a cause. And then specifically about Jesus, it says one who initiates and completes faith in the souls of men.
So I have the one who leads from the beginning, and preeminence is what is intended there, or suggested there, that he is the preeminent author.
And I liked my leg. It said, it sounds awful.
So
I don't
funny
know.
when we
I'm
don't
going to have to
know.
bring it so you can see it. Pioneer.
Pioneer, yes.
I liked that.
That's
That was
good.
good. And then we said he furnished the perfect development, the supreme example of faith, and thus he is leader of the whole believing host. I could get into the weeds on this one because I don't necessarily agree with all of the word study and commentaries on this, because God has been showing me a bigger picture of what he's talking about through Hebrews, and I've never been able to fully share that with you, but it would take me like 30 minutes. So why don't we take a little break, and then we'll come back and we'll look at perfecter, what we found out about perfecter, and then we'll finish up our discussion. So.